Ottoman state. This newly formed army began advancing once again through the Balkans. In 1448, the two armies were once again approaching confrontation on the plains of Kosovo. In 1448, the Ottoman and Crusader armies once again faced each other on the plains of Kosovo. Both armies formed their lines across a wide battlefield before the clash. Soon, intense fighting began across the plains of Kosovo. As the war progressed, the quality of military training began to play a significant role in combat. In 1448, the battle on the plains of Kosovo continued for days. As the battle progressed, the resistance of the Crusader army began to collapse. The Second Battle of Kosovo ended with a decisive Ottoman victory. With this victory, Ottoman dominance in the Balkans was secured, and attention now turned toward Constantinople. To be continued. In 1451, Mehmed II ascended the throne at a young age. But his ambitions were far greater than those of an ordinary ruler. There was a city that had stood for centuries, and that city was Constantinople. Constantinople stood between Europe and Asia. It controlled one of the most important crossroads of the world. Its massive walls had protected the city for centuries. Many armies had failed before these walls. Mehmed II began extensive preparations for the conquest. Rumeli Fortress was built at the narrowest point of the Bosphorus. This fortress was built to cut off aid reaching Constantinople. Now it had become nearly impossible for aid to reach Constantinople by sea. Mehmed II received a strong education from an early age. He was educated by the most important scholars of his time. He gained deep knowledge in history, geography, and military strategy. He learned Ottoman, Turkish, Arabic, Persian, Greek, and Latin, developing a remarkable intellectual background. From an early age, the idea of conquering Constantinople had taken root in Mehmed II's mind. Constantinople was seen not just as a city, but as a great objective. The words of Prophet Muhammad, foretelling the future conquest of Constantinople, had turned this objective into a great ideal in the Ottoman world. Mehmed II was determined to fulfill this ideal. Mehmed II ordered the construction of massive cannons to break the walls of Constantinople. These cannons were among the largest siege weapons of their time. The massive cannons were transported with great difficulty to the walls of Constantinople. Now the walls of Constantinople faced one of the greatest sieges in their history. Constantinople was no longer as powerful as it once had been. The defense of the city rested on Byzantine Emperor Constantine XI. However, the defensive strength of the city was very limited. The great chain placed across the Golden Horn was one of the key elements of the city's defense. Emperor Constantine XI had requested help from the European states. However, the European states could not respond to this call as quickly as expected. Only a limited number of reinforcements were able to reach the city. The Genoese commander, Giovanni Giustiniani, took an important role in the defense of the city. The Ottoman fleet advanced toward Constantinople to take part in the siege. However, the great chain across the Golden Horn prevented the Ottoman fleet from entering. This obstacle significantly limited the movement of the Ottoman fleet. Mehmed II began preparing a new plan to overcome this obstacle. Mehmed II was searching for another way to reach the Golden Horn. For this purpose, a plan was made to move the ships over land. The Ottoman ships began to be transported over land with great preparation. This move came as a great surprise to the defenders of Constantinople. The entry of the Ottoman fleet into the harbor changed the course of the siege. The city's defenses now faced a new threat. Ottoman forces had now surrounded the city, both by land and by sea. The balance of the siege was gradually shifting in favor of the Ottoman Empire. Ottoman cannons opened heavy fire against the walls of Constantinople. The massive cannons continued, firing without interruption for days. Byzantine defenders tried to repair the damaged walls. Throughout the night, However, the walls were now struggling to withstand the massive assault. Before the final assault, intense preparations were underway in the Ottoman army. The soldiers prayed before the approaching great assault. Mehmed II personally inspected his army before the assault. A silent but historic night unfolded before the walls of Constantinople. On the morning of May 29, 1453, the Ottoman army launched the final assault. Ottoman soldiers advanced with determination to reach the walls. The Byzantine defenders resisted with all their remaining strength on the walls. The breaches in the walls showed that the defense of Constantinople was beginning to collapse. After a long siege, Ottoman soldiers finally breached the walls of Constantinople. The defense of the city had completely collapsed. Mehmed II entered the conquered city, marking the beginning of a new era. Constantinople would now become the capital of the Ottoman Empire. The conquest of Constantinople in 1453 marked not only the fall of a city, but the end of an era and the beginning of a new age. To be continued. Europe had lived for centuries under the shadow of wars, plagues, and fear. Cities were dark, the streets were silent, and death was everywhere. The church controlled the intellectual world of Europe, and people feared questioning it. But from this darkness, a new age would rise and change history forever. The Renaissance was born in Italy. Florence, Venice, and Genoa had become the centers of Mediterranean trade. Wealth arriving from the east was beginning to transform the Italian cities. And this wealth would begin the rebirth of Europe. In Florence, one family stood above the others. The Medici family had built immense wealth through banking. Artists, scientists, and thinkers were now supported by powerful families. And Florence was becoming the cultural heart of Europe. In 1453, Constantinople fell. Many Byzantine scholars began fleeing to Italy. They carried not only their belongings, but also the knowledge of the ancient world. And this knowledge would spark a great intellectual transformation in Europe. The people of the Renaissance were looking back to the past, especially to the worlds of ancient Rome and Greece. Ancient sculptures, architecture, and philosophy were being rediscovered. Europe was bringing the legacy of the ancient world back to life. And then, one of the greatest geniuses in history emerged, Leonardo da Vinci was not only a painter, he was also an inventor, engineer, and scientist. And his ideas would influence centuries to come. Renaissance scholars were trying to understand the human body. Muscles, bones, and organs were being studied in unprecedented detail. Knowledge was no longer coming only from ancient books, but from direct observation. And these studies would lay the foundation of modern science. The workshops of Italy were becoming the new centers of knowledge in Europe. Painters and artists had begun to recreate reality itself. Perspective, light, and human anatomy were transforming art forever. And art was becoming one of the greatest symbols of the Renaissance. The Renaissance was not only the rebirth of art, but also of science. People had begun to question the natural world. New ideas were spreading across Europe. And this transformation would lay the foundation of modern science. Scholars had begun to study the heavens. Stars and planets were being observed more closely than ever before. Some scholars began to believe the old ideas might be wrong, and the heavens were becoming humanity's new frontier of discovery. The Polish astronomer Nicolaus Copernicus introduced a revolutionary idea. Earth was not the center of the universe. Later, Galileo began observing the heavens through a telescope, and humanity's view of the universe began to change forever. But these new ideas had begun to threaten the Church. Scientists were now questioning the old order. And this questioning would spark a great conflict across Europe. But the spread of knowledge could no longer be stopped. And then an invention appeared that would change everything. The printing press changed the speed of knowledge forever. Books could now be reproduced in massive numbers. And ideas began spreading across all of Europe. The Renaissance had given people a new idea. The world could be explored. Europe was now sailing into the oceans, and the age of exploration was about to begin. In 1492, Christopher Columbus sailed westward. His goal was to reach India. But without realizing it, he had reached a new continent. And this discovery would change the fate of the world forever. European sailors were now reaching every corner of the world. Vasco da Gama had found the sea route to India, and Magellan's fleet would sail around the world. Europe was no longer just a continent, it was becoming a global power. The Renaissance was transforming not only ideas, but entire cities. Massive domes, marble columns, and grand structures were rising everywhere. Art and architecture had become the new symbols of power. And Europe was being reborn. The Renaissance had completely transformed Europe. Kings were growing stronger, and new states were rising. Science, education, and ideas were shaping Europe's future. And a new age had begun. Europe was no longer the old world. Science, art, and exploration were leading humanity into a new age. And the fate of the world was changing forever. Because the Renaissance was the birth of the modern world. In 15th century Europe, spices were worth more than gold. The Ottoman control over trade routes forced Europe to search for new paths. And so the kingdoms of Europe turned toward the oceans. The greatest age of exploration in human history was beginning. The pioneer of the age of exploration was the Kingdom of Portugal. Prince Henry established schools for navigation and cartography. Portuguese sailors began exploring the coasts of Africa. Their goal was clear: to reach India by sea. In 1497, Vasco da Gama began his voyage to India. Throughout the long journey, the sailors fought against death. And finally, Europeans reached India. The spice trade was changing, and world trade was entering a new era. Christopher Columbus's voyage continued for weeks in uncertainty. The crew was beginning to lose hope. And one morning, a new world appeared on the horizon. Columbus believed he had reached Asia, but he had actually discovered America. The newly discovered lands sparked great rivalry among European kingdoms. In 1494, the Treaty of Tordesillas was signed. The world was being divided between two great powers. Because of this agreement, Brazil came under Portuguese control. In 1519, Ferdinand Magellan began one of the greatest voyages in history. After months of searching, they discovered a hidden passage in the south. The Pacific Ocean was far greater than they had imagined. And finally, for the first time in history, the world had been circumnavigated. The Spanish did not only explore America, they also began conquering it. The Aztec Empire was one of the most powerful states in the Americas. But war, disease, and technological differences were weakening the Aztecs. And in the end, the Aztec Empire collapsed. In South America, the Inca Empire became the next target. The Incas were one of the greatest civilizations of the Andes. The Inca Emperor Atahualpa was trapped by the Spanish. And soon after, the Inca Empire also collapsed. The age of exploration increased the wealth of Europe. The center of world trade had shifted to the Atlantic Ocean. But this era also brought suffering to millions. And the world had changed forever. Gold and silver from the Americas began transforming the European economy. European cities were rapidly growing, and trade was entering a new era. While Mediterranean ports declined, the Atlantic coasts were rising. England, Spain, and Portugal were becoming the greatest maritime powers in the world. The age of exploration also had a dark side. Millions of Africans were forced into slavery. The wealth of the New World was built on human labor and suffering. And the Atlantic Ocean became the new center of global trade. Over time, new maritime powers also emerged. The Dutch and the English began rising in global trade. The riches of the East were falling under the control of European companies. And world trade was becoming truly global for the first time. The age of exploration marked the rise of European empires. The nations that ruled the seas now ruled the world. The old world order was ending, and the modern age was beginning. And humanity had entered a path with no return. The ship that crossed the oceans did not only discover new lands, they changed the course of human history. New continents, new empires, and a new world was born. And the world would never be the same again. For centuries, Europe stood united under one faith. The Catholic Church was the most powerful authority on the continent. Kings were changing, wars were ending. But the power of the Church remained above all else. People believed salvation could only come through the Church. Fear of damnation had spread across every corner of Europe. The Church controlled not only religion, but laws, education, and human life itself. Europe was ruled under a single spiritual authority. Over time, corruption within the Church began to grow. Some priests were selling forgiveness for money. People were told that money could bring them closer to heaven. Fear had merged with faith. While the Church gathered immense wealth, the people of Europe lived in poverty. Anger was silently growing. A dangerous question was now rising across Europe. What if the Church had lost its way? At that moment, an invention appeared that would change the course of history. The printing press. Knowledge was now spreading faster than ever before, for the first time. For the first time, people could freely read new ideas. Under the influence of the Renaissance, Europe was beginning to change. People were now learning to question authority. And in Germany, a monk would change this order forever. Martin Luther. Martin Luther was originally studying law. But one day, a violent storm changed his life forever. Believing he had escaped death, Luther decided to dedicate his life to God. And he entered a monastery. He prayed for hours and fasted for days. But no matter what he did, he could not find peace. While studying the Bible, Luther reached an idea that would change everything. Salvation was possible through faith alone. At that time, the church was selling documents called indulgences. People were told their sins could be forgiven. Some preachers claimed that paying money could bring people closer to heaven. Fear was controlling the faith of the people. Pope Leo X was gathering enormous wealth for St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. And the sale of indulgences was spreading rapidly across Europe. Martin Luther grew furious as he witnessed these events, because to him, faith was not something to be sold. In 1517, Martin Luther wrote one of the most important documents in history, the 95 Theses. Luther nailed his theses to the door of Wittenberg Church, and the silence of Europe was broken. Thanks to the printing press, Luther's ideas spread across Europe within weeks. People were now openly questioning the church. Rome was consumed with anger. For the first time, the authority of the church was being seriously challenged. In 1521, Martin Luther was summoned to the Diet of Worms. The emperor and church officials demanded that he take back his words. But Luther refused to step back. Unless proven otherwise, I cannot take back my words. The Pope excommunicated Luther, and the Holy Roman Empire declared him an outlaw. Now anyone could kill Martin Luther without punishment. But several German princes secretly began protecting him. Martin Luther continued working while hidden inside Wartburg Castle, and he began translating the Bible into German. This moment was a revolution in European history. For the first time, ordinary people could read the Bible in their own language. The church's absolute control over knowledge was beginning to break. New ideas were spreading rapidly across Europe. The Reform movement was no longer limited to Germany. Europe was entering a new era. Luther's ideas began spreading across different regions of Europe. In Switzerland, Ulrich Zwingli was challenging Catholic traditions. Then, John Calvin emerged, and the Reformation movement became even more radical. According to Calvin, God had already determined the fate of mankind. This belief spread rapidly across Europe. Europe was no longer a single Christian world. Catholics and Protestants had begun seeing each other as enemies. As the Reformation grew, tension across Europe intensified. In Germany, the peasants began to revolt. For years, the people had lived under crushing taxes, and now they demanded freedom. Reformation ideas were turning into rebellion. But Martin Luther did not support the peasant uprising. He feared Europe would descend into total chaos. The rebellion was crushed with brutal force. Tens of thousands of people lost their lives across Europe. Meanwhile, in England, a new crisis was emerging. King Henry VIII desired a male heir. But the Pope refused to annul Henry's marriage. And England found itself in conflict with Rome. In 1534, the king was declared head of the Church of England. And thus, the Anglican Church was born. Monasteries were closed, and church lands were seized. England was now entering a completely different path. The Catholic Church realized it was facing a massive crisis, and the Counter-Reformation began. The Council of Trent was assembled. The Church was trying to stop corruption within itself. During this period, the Jesuits emerged. They became one of the strongest defenders of Catholicism. The Jesuits built schools, educated people, and spread Christianity across the world. But the conflicts in Europe were far from over. The religious division in Europe soon turned into massive wars. Catholics and Protestants took up arms against one another. In 1572, Paris witnessed a horrific massacre. Thousands of Protestants were killed during the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. The streets of Europe were filled with blood and fear. The religious wars were tearing the continent apart. In Spain, the Inquisition brutally punished religious dissent. The Catholic world was struggling to preserve its authority. In 1618, Europe was dragged into a new catastrophe. The 30 Years' War had begun. The war was destroying not only armies, but entire populations. Cities burned, and famine spread across Europe. Catholics and Protestants fought each other for decades. Europe had descended into bloody destruction. In 1648, the Peace of Westphalia was signed, and Europe entered a new era. The 30 Years' War had devastated Europe. Millions of people died from war, famine, and disease. The Peace of Westphalia changed the balance of power in Europe. States would now be allowed to choose their own religion. The era of a united Christian Europe had come to an end. The continent had been permanently divided. The Reformation was not only a religious movement, it was a great revolution that carried Europe into the modern age. The Safavids were a great empire that transformed Iran. The Kizilbash warriors formed the foundation of Safavid power. The Safavids did not only fight wars, they also expanded Persian culture and art. And eventually, they entered one of history's greatest rivalries against the Ottomans. In 1501, a new power was rising in Persia. A young leader was about to change the fate of the Middle East. That leader was Shah Ismail Safavi. At a very young age, he captured Tabriz and founded the Safavid Empire. The greatest power of the Safavids was the Kizilbash Turkoman warriors. They were not just soldiers, they were a fanatical force loyal to Shah Ismail. The rise of the Safavids would become a major threat to the Ottomans, and soon, the two empires would enter a deadly struggle. The origins of the Safavids did not come from an empire, but from a religious order. Everything began in Ardabil. The founder of the order was Sheikh Safi al-Din Ardabili. At first, the Safaviya was only a mystical Sufi movement. But over time, the order began to grow. Turkoman tribes were gathering under the Safavid banner. A religious movement slowly transformed into a military power. And eventually, the Safavids marched toward the throne of Persia. Shah Ismail's greatest decision was changing the official faith of Persia. The Safavids declared Shi'ism as the state religion. This decision completely changed Persian history, because Persia slowly began to form a Shiite identity. But this situation would create a major conflict with the Ottoman Empire. Now in the Middle East, two great powers stood against each other. And this rivalry would soon turn into devastating wars. Shah Ismail was not only a religious leader, he was also a highly successful commander. The Kizilbash armies rapidly conquered much of Persia. Rival Turkoman states were falling one by one. Within a short time, the Safavid state became a vast empire. Beyond Persia, they expanded into Iraq and the Caucasus. The rapid rise of the Safavids created great concern in the Ottoman palace, because in the east, a dangerous new rival had emerged. A harsh and determined ruler had now taken the Ottoman throne. Sultan Selim I. Sultan Selim Sato saw the Safavids as a major threat, because Kizilbash influence had spread deep into Anatolia. The Ottoman Empire began preparing for a massive war. Toward the east, a gigantic army was marching. Now, war was inevitable. The Ottomans and the Safavids were preparing for one of history's greatest conflicts. War was now inevitable. In 1514, the two armies met on the plains of Chaldiran. The Kizilbash cavalry launched their attack, but the Ottoman defense was extremely strong. The Battle of Chaldiran became one of the moments that changed military history forever. The Safavid army suffered devastating losses. Shah Ismail was forced to retreat. When Chaldiran marked the beginning of the Ottoman-Safavid rivalry. After the victory at Chaldiran, the Ottoman army entered Tabriz. This defeat left a deep impact on Shah Ismail. But the Safavids did not collapse. The empire slowly began rebuilding itself. The Ottomans and the Safavids would fight for control of the Middle East for many years. The Safavids were not only a military power, they also became a major cultural center. Art, architecture, and Persian culture flourished during this era. Especially as Isfahan became one of the most magnificent cities in the world. And the Safavids became one of the empires that changed Middle Eastern history forever. After the defeat at Chaldiran, Shah Ismail slowly began losing his former strength. But the Safavid Empire survived. New leaders kept the empire alive. Over time, Isfahan became the magnificent capital of the Safavid Empire. And the Safavid became one of the most powerful empires in Middle Eastern history. Years later, a powerful ruler rose to the Safavid throne. Shah Abbas completely transformed the military system. During his reign, Isfahan became one of the richest and most magnificent cities in the world. Art and science also flourished. Safavid culture influenced the entire region. But the Ottomans' favorite rivalry did not end. The struggle was concentrated mainly in three regions: Eastern Anatolia, Iraq, and the Caucasus. But over time, the Safavid Empire began to weaken. But the legacy they left behind would live forever in Middle Eastern history. Foreign invasions accelerated the empire's collapse. In 1722, the Safavid Empire effectively collapsed. 1912, China, the last emperor, was about to fall. Pu Yi was only 6 years old, and a 4,000-year-old imperial system was ending. The longest-lasting empire in world history was fading into darkness. The ancient Chinese empire now rested on the shoulders of a child. There was fear inside the palace because the dynasty was collapsing. From Shang to Qing, a 4,000-year-old order was nearing its end, and China's last dynasty was fading into darkness. China had been ruled by dynasties for centuries. Empires rose, wars were fought, yet the system survived. And this civilization became the longest-lasting political system in history. But now, that order was collapsing. 1368, a peasant seized the throne of China. Zhu Yuanzhang grew up in poverty. He became a monk, then a rebel, and the Ming dynasty was born. Hongwu was a ruthless emperor. He executed thousands of officials, but he rebuilt agriculture. And China began to rise again. Yongle opened China to the seas, and Zheng He commanded the greatest fleet on earth. Chinese ships reached the coasts of Africa. But then, China closed its doors to the world. Famine was slowly destroying China. And the rebellions began. In 1644, the rebels entered Beijing, and the last Ming emperor took his own life. But the real threat came from the north. The Manchus were building a new empire, and the gates of China were opened to the Manchus. In 1644, the Qing dynasty began. The new emperor was only a child. The Qing regime changed China by force. Cities that resisted were destroyed. And the Qing began ruling all of China. In 1661, Kangxi ascended the throne. Kangxi remained on the throne of China for 61 years. He crushed rebellions and reunified the Qing Empire. He was fascinated by science, especially astronomy and mathematics. And under Kangxi, the Qing once again became one of the world's greatest empires. In 1735, the era of Qianlong began, and the Qing Empire reached the greatest extent in its history. Art, porcelain, and imperial culture reached their peak. But China still believed it had no need for the outside world. In the 1830s, a new war was approaching. Opium addicted millions of people. And China tried to stop the opium trade. But Britain responded with war. The Qing army was unprepared for modern warfare. Britain's industrial power crushed China. In 1842, the Treaty of Nanking was signed. Hong Kong now belonged to Britain. In 1860, Beijing fell. The Summer Palace was looted and burned. At the same time, China was falling into civil war. The Taiping Rebellion caused the deaths of millions. In 1894, the Qing entered war with Japan. And China collapsed against Japan's modern army. Taiwan was lost. The Qing was humiliated once again. And some believed China needed to change. In 1898, Guangxu launched major reforms. But Cixi refused to give up power. The emperor was imprisoned. The reforms were stopped. And China was thrown into chaos once again. In 1900, the Eight-Nation Alliance marched toward Beijing. In 1900, the armies of Britain, Japan, Russia, Germany, France, America, Italy, and Austria-Hungary advanced toward Beijing. Cixi fled the capital. China was now under the pressure of foreign powers, and the Qing dynasty was living through its final days. China was occupied by foreign armies in its own capital. The Qing dynasty agreed to pay massive reparations, and the Chinese people began losing faith in the empire. Inside the army, revolution was now being discussed. In 1908, Empress Dowager Cixi died, and the Qing dynasty lost its last powerful ruler. The one who ascended the throne was only a small child, Pui, the last emperor of China. In 1911, the uprising began in Wuchang, and the revolution quickly spread across China. One by one, the provinces broke away from Qing rule. The revolutionaries wanted a new China, a republic. And in the end, Qing generals agreed to surrender. On February 12, 1912, Puyi was removed from the throne, and the 4,000-year-old Chinese Empire came to an end. The story of Russia began with the Vikings. Warriors from the north were moving east. In 862, Rurik arrived in Novgorod, and the foundations of the Russian state were laid. In the 9th century, Viking traders and warriors from the north began descending into the rivers of Eastern Europe. These warriors were called the Varangians. Soon, they began controlling the region's trade routes. According to legend, the Slavic tribes invited the Viking leader Rurik to bring order to the region. And so, the foundations of the Russian state were laid in Novgorod. Over time, the Varangians captured the city of Kiev. Thus, the Kievan Rus state was born. It would become the first great core of future Russia. During the reign of Prince Oleg, Kiev became one of Eastern Europe's most powerful centers. Trade routes stretching between the north and Byzantium rapidly enriched the lands of the Rus. In the year 988, Prince Vladimir made a decision that would change history forever. Kievan Rus officially adopted Christianity, and Byzantine culture began spreading across the lands of the Rus. Orthodox Christianity became one of the foundations of Russian identity. Russia was no longer just a warrior society. A new civilization was being born. But a great disaster was approaching from the east: the Mongols. In the 13th century, Mongol armies led by Bata Khan began destroying Rus cities one by one. Kiev fell, cities were burned, the people were massacred. The Rus principalities were now under the rule of the Golden Horde, and Russia had entered a long dark age. But the Rus principalities did not disappear completely. Moscow slowly began gaining power. The princes of Moscow cooperated with the Mongols while surpassing their rivals. In 1380, Dmitry Donskoy launched a great resistance against the Mongols. The Battle of Kulikovo gave the Russian people hope for freedom for the first time. By the 15th century, Moscow was no longer just a principality. A new power was rising. Ivan III refused to pay tribute to the Golden Horde. In 1480, two armies faced each other at the Ugra River, and Mongol domination began to collapse. Moscow had now become the new center of the Russian world. In 1547, Ivan IV declared himself Tsar. This title symbolized Russia's transformation into an empire. But Ivan's rule became increasingly brutal. Fear became a tool to rule Russia. At the same time, Russia began a massive expansion into Siberia. After Ivan's death, Russia descended into great chaos. Famine, civil wars, and struggles for the throne began tearing the country apart. At one point, even Polish armies entered Moscow. Russia stood on the edge of collapse. But the people rose once again, and Russia was preparing for the rise of a new dynasty. In 1613, the Romanov dynasty rose to the Russian throne. The new dynasty tried to end years of chaos. During the Romanov era, Russia began expanding once again. The endless lands of Siberia would change the future of the Russian Empire. During the early years of the Romanov dynasty, Russia slowly began rising again. Years of war and famine had devastated the country. The new government was trying to rebuild the army and restore order. And the Orthodox Church became one of the greatest pillars of Romanov power. In 17th century Russia, religion was more than just belief. The Orthodox Church had become one of the most powerful institutions of the state. But life remained extremely difficult for the people. Peasants struggled under heavy taxes. Russia was growing, but the gap between nobles and common people was also deepening. Meanwhile, Russia continued expanding endlessly toward the east. Cossack units and explorers were advancing into the unknown lands of Siberia. Siberia was more than land. The fur trade was bringing enormous wealth to Russia. And with every passing year, Russia was becoming one of the largest land empires in the world. Born in 1672, Peter was very different from other Russian princes. From an early age, he was deeply interested in weapons, ships, and European technology. But intrigues inside the Kremlin never ended. Power struggles still shook Russia. Peter had already begun, dreaming about the wars of the future. One of the places that fascinated Peter the most was the foreign quarter of Moscow. There he met European engineers and soldiers. He realized how far behind Russia had fallen. But Peter's ideas disturbed the old Russian nobility. Peter's dream was clear: to turn Russia into one of Europe's great powers. In 1697, Peter left Russia and began his journey to Europe. But Peter did not travel simply to explore. He wanted to learn Europe's secrets. He studied shipbuilding, artillery, and modern armies. He was preparing to transform Russia completely. Peter now understood that Russia would never become a great power unless it changed. When Peter returned from Europe, he was no longer the same man. His first target was the old order. He began forcibly changing the traditions of the Russian nobility. The army was reorganized. Modern weapons and European-style discipline were introduced. and Peter's greatest dream was to give Russia a powerful navy. But a great obstacle stood before Peter: the Swedish Empire. At that time, Sweden was one of the most powerful states in Northern Europe. In 1700, at Narva, the Russian army suffered a devastating defeat. But Peter did not give up. This defeat would make Russia even stronger. After the defeat at Narva, Peter began rebuilding the Russian army from top to bottom. New cannons were forged, new weapons were produced, and for the first time in Russian history, a true war navy began to rise. Peter was no longer just a czar, he was becoming the architect of a new Russian empire. In 1703, Peter decided to build a new city on the Baltic coast. This city would become Russia's gateway to Europe. But St. Petersburg rose through great suffering. Thousands died during its construction. And before long, Russia's new heart had been born. In 1709, Russia and Sweden faced each other in one final great battle. King Charles XII of Sweden led one of Europe's most feared armies. But at Poltava, everything changed. The Russian army achieved one of the greatest victories in its history. The world now had to accept a new reality. Russia had become a great power. After the victory at Poltava, Peter declared that Russia was now an empire. Russia was changing rapidly. European influence had spread throughout the royal court. New schools were opened. Science, engineering, and the navy were strengthened. Peter's dream had come true. Russia was now one of the world's great powers. What once began as small Viking principalities had become a vast empire. Russia's rise was only just beginning. In 1725, Peter the Great died. He left behind a powerful empire, but its order was fragile. Palace intrigues began once again. Now, power not blood would decide the throne. And Russia was being dragged into a new storm. The young German princess arriving in Russia did not yet know she would change history forever. This princess, named Sophie, converted to Orthodoxy and changed her name. But palace life was nothing like she expected. Intrigue and power struggles were everywhere. And young Catherine would soon begin dreaming of the Russian throne. In 1762, Russia was once again dragged into a palace coup. Catherine gained the support of the army and imperial guards. Tsar Peter III was removed from the throne, and the Romanov palace was stained with blood once again. Russia now had a new ruler, Catherine the Great. When Catherine ascended the throne, Russia was entering a new era. Her goal was not only to keep the throne, she wanted to make Russia the strongest state in Europe. During Catherine's reign, the Russian court became increasingly European in style. But behind the palace's luxury, millions of peasants lived under harsh conditions. One of Catherine's greatest goals was to give Russia access to warm seas. This goal brought Russia into direct conflict with the Ottoman Empire. The Black Sea was no longer controlled only by the Ottomans. The Russian Navy was rapidly growing stronger. And eventually, Crimea became part of the Russian Empire. During Catherine's reign, Russia began expanding not only southward, but westward as well. Poland was divided, and Russia advanced toward the heart of Europe. European powers could no longer ignore Russia. Under Catherine the Great, Russia had become a true superpower. In 1796, Catherine the Great died. Russia was now a vast empire, but its future was uncertain. At that very moment, a new power was rising in Europe, Napoleon Bonaparte. And very soon, Russia and France would be drawn into one of history's greatest wars. In 1812, Napoleon marched into Russia with one of the greatest armies in history. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers were advancing toward the Russian Empire. Instead of fighting directly, Russian commanders chose to retreat. But the Russians left nothing behind. Fields, villages, even entire towns were burned. At last, Napoleon reached Moscow, but the city was silent. Soon, Moscow was consumed by flames. Russia was willing to burn even its own capital. Then winter arrived. Cold, hunger, and disease began destroying the French army. When Napoleon retreated, Europe's greatest army had been shattered. In 1814, Russian armies entered Paris. With Napoleon's defeat, Russia became one of the most powerful states in Europe. The Tsarist Empire was now at its peak, but beneath its glory, great problems were growing. While magnificent palaces rose, millions of Russian peasants continued living in poverty. By the mid-1800s, Russia had begun to change. Industrialization was growing, but the lives of workers were becoming harsher. Anger began spreading among the people. Hunger and poverty could no longer be hidden. And the Romanov dynasty still could not fully see the storm that was coming. In 1905, Russia was shaken by its first great wave of revolution. Thousands marched to ask the Tsar for help, but they were met with bullets. This event destroyed the people's trust in the Tsar. And now in Russia, revolution was no longer just an idea, but an approaching reality. In 1914, Russia found itself trapped in a new catastrophe. World War I began destroying the Russian army and economy. Hunger was spreading through the cities. People were no longer thinking about war, but survival. And the Romanov dynasty had reached the edge of collapse. In 1917, Russia finally exploded. Even the soldiers no longer wanted to defend the Tsar. The empire was collapsing from within. And finally, Nicholas II abdicated the throne. The 300-year Romanov dynasty had come to an end. Russia was now entering a path of no return. But the revolution was far from over, because a new leader was entering the stage. Vladimir Lenin. The Bolsheviks now wanted total power. In late 1917, the Bolsheviks seized control of the government. And so, a new era began that would change world history forever. But the Bolshevik victory did not bring peace to Russia. The country was soon dragged into civil war. The Reds and the Whites were fighting each other. Hunger, disease, and war destroyed the lives of millions. But in the end, the Bolsheviks won, and the foundations of the Soviet Union were laid. In 1924, Lenin died, but the real struggle for power in the Soviet Union was only beginning. The winner of this struggle would be Joseph Stalin. Under Stalin, the Soviet Union industrialized rapidly. Factories and massive projects spread across the country. But the price of this growth was terrible. Fear, oppression, and purges affected millions of people. In 1941, Hitler launched an invasion against the Soviet Union. The German armies advanced rapidly. Cities began falling one after another. But the course of the war changed at Stalingrad. The Soviet resistance shocked the world. The Red Army had returned, and now the tide of the war was turning. In 1945, the Red Army reached Berlin. The Nazis' final defense had collapsed. The war in Europe was coming to an end. The Soviet Union was now one of the most powerful nations on Earth. But a new struggle was about to begin. The world was now dividing into two sides, and the Cold War was beginning. Throughout the Cold War, the Soviet Union competed with America for control of the world. The space race, nuclear weapons, and a global propaganda war had begun. But years later, the mighty Soviet Union began to collapse. From Viking principalities to the Soviet Union, Russia became one of the most powerful and complex empires in history, and its story is still continuing. Between 1799 and 1815, Europe became hell. Kingdoms collapsed, millions died, and the entire continent fell under the shadow of one man. His name was Napoleon Bonaparte. He began as a general, but soon became the Emperor of Europe. His armies could not be stopped until the frozen winter of Russia. And in the end, the man who shook the world fell at Waterloo. Europe was burning, and from the chaos, one man rose, Napoleon Bonaparte. He was not just a general, he would change Europe forever. His armies could not be stopped, kingdoms collapsed, Europe fell into war. But every empire has an end, and Napoleon's end would come at Waterloo. Napoleon was born in Corsica in 1769. He was noble, but not rich. At a young age, he was sent to military schools in France. He excelled in artillery science. When the French Revolution began, an opportunity appeared for Napoleon, and he quickly began to rise. His victories in Italy caught Europe's attention. Now everyone knew his name. In 1798, Napoleon turned toward Egypt. His target was Britain's trade route. Near the pyramids, a great battle began. The French army crushed the Mamluks. But soon after, the British Navy attacked. The French fleet was destroyed at Abu. Napoleon left his army behind and secretly returned to France because a greater goal was waiting for him. France was in chaos. The people were exhausted. The government was collapsing. In 1799, Napoleon made his move and seized power through a coup. Now he was the first consul of France, but in reality, he was the nation's sole ruler. Napoleon's rise had begun, and Europe would soon change forever. By 1804, Napoleon wanted more, to become the sole ruler of France. A grand ceremony was held in Paris, and Napoleon placed the crown upon his own head. Europe's kings were shocked because France now had a new emperor. Napoleon was no longer just a general, he had become the most powerful man in Europe. Napoleon's rise terrified Europe, and a great war began. In 1805, the Battle of Austerlitz began. Napoleon had trapped his enemies. In 1805, the Battle of Austerlitz began. Napoleon had trapped his enemies. Austerlitz became Napoleon's greatest victory. Now he ruled Europe. After Austerlitz, Napoleon did not stop. Much of Europe fell under French control. French armies marched into Europe's cities. Kingdoms collapsed one by one. Napoleon even placed his own family on thrones. Europe now lived beneath his shadow. But one power still resisted. Britain had not surrendered. Napoleon could not defeat Britain at sea. The French navies suffered heavy losses. So instead, he created a new plan, the Continental Blockade. Europe received the order. Trade with Britain was forbidden, but the economy began to collapse. And eventually, a major crisis with Russia began. That crisis would become a disaster. In 1808, Napoleon invaded Spain, but the people did not surrender. Guerrilla warfare began. The French army was attacked everywhere. Britain joined the war as well. Napoleon's armies were slowly being exhausted. And at that moment, a new crisis was rising in the east. Russia was the coming storm. In 1812, Napoleon marched into Russia. With him came hundreds of thousands of soldiers. But the Russians kept retreating. They burned cities and left no supplies behind. Napoleon finally reached Moscow, but the city was empty, and soon after, it was consumed by flames. When winter arrived, disaster followed. The cold destroyed Napoleon's army. After the Russian disaster, Europe united once again and declared war on Napoleon. Russia, Prussia, Austria, and Britain gathered on the same side. In 1813, the Battle of Leipzig began. For the first time, Napoleon was truly stopped. Now he was retreating, and his empire had begun to collapse. In 1815, Napoleon escaped exile and returned to France. The soldiers joined him once again. Napoleon was back in power. But the final battle was near. At Waterloo, Napoleon suffered a crushing defeat. Napoleon was sent into exile, and years later, he died alone in the Atlantic. Napoleon died, but his influence continued across Europe. His battle tactics were studied in military academies for years. The Napoleonic Wars accelerated the birth of modern Europe. To some, he was a tyrant. To others, a genius. But one truth remained: Napoleon changed the world. 1848. Europe was burning. Kings were afraid, and the people demanded freedom. Napoleon was dead, but the ideas he spread still haunted the streets of Europe. Europe's kings believed they had restored the old order, but they failed to see the coming storm. In 1848, the flames of nationalism, freedom, and revolution would sweep across the continent. In 1815, Europe's kings gathered together. They wanted to restore the order changed by Napoleon. In 1815, Europe's kings gathered together. They wanted to restore the order changed by Napoleon. Censorship increased. Newspapers were shut down. Armies kept the people under pressure. But the ideas of freedom were not dead. The fire of revolution was silently growing across Europe. In the 19th century, Europe was changing rapidly. Factories were growing, and cities were covered in smoke. Workers labored for 14 hours a day. Children were dying inside factories. In the 1840s, an economic crisis began. Bread prices soared. The people of Europe faced hunger. Now, it was not only those demanding freedom. The hungry also wanted revolution. In 1848, the fire of revolution exploded in Paris. The streets quickly filled with barricades. King Louis-Philippe of France was forced to flee before the anger of the people. The monarchy collapsed. The Second Republic was declared in France. The revolution that began in Paris would soon spread across all of Europe. The revolutions quickly reached Austria. The streets of Vienna filled with protests. Students and workers built barricades in the name of freedom. Metternich, one of Europe's most powerful men, was forced to flee. This moment symbolized the beginning of the collapse of old Europe. During the revolutions of 1848, the German people also wanted unity. Germany was still divided into dozens of small states. The idea of nationalism was growing. Many Germans dreamed of uniting under one flag. The Frankfurt Parliament gathered. Its goal was to create a free and united Germany. Although this movement failed, the idea of a united Germany could no longer be stopped. The revolutions of 1848 also shook Italy. Many Italians now dreamed of a united nation. Revolutionaries like Giuseppe Mazzini began organizing the youth of Italy. In northern Italy, the people rose against Austrian rule. The revolutions of 1848 failed, but the unification of Italy had already begun. Most of the revolutions of 1848 were quickly crushed. The kings regained control once again. The revolutionaries were divided among themselves. Workers, liberals, and nationalists did not share the same goals. Thousands of people were killed. Many revolutionaries were sent into exile. The revolutions appeared to have failed, but the ideas of freedom and nationalism could no longer be stopped. The revolutions of 1848 had failed, but Europe had already begun to change. Italy and Germany would unite in the years ahead. As nationalism grew, the great empires slowly began to weaken. The storm that began in 1848 would eventually lead Europe toward even greater wars. Napoleon was dead, but the ideas he spread continued to live on. The people now demanded freedom, constitutions, and national unity. The old order of Europe was beginning to collapse. The revolutions of 1848 appeared to fail, but they laid the foundations of modern Europe. And Europe would never be the same again. The revolutions of 1848 became one of the turning points in European history. Although they were defeated, the ideas of freedom could no longer be destroyed. Europe was entering the modern age. Industry, nationalism, and power struggles would reshape the world. And the changes that began in 1848 would one day lead to wars that changed the entire world. In 1848, people rose up across Europe. The continent was shaken by the fire of revolution. The ideas of freedom, constitutions, and nationalism inspired millions of people to rise. The kings crushed the revolutions, but the old order of Europe would never truly return. The revolutions of 1848 became the beginning of modern Europe and the great wars to come. The revolutions were over, but Europe was no longer the same. Industry was expanding, and railways were connecting the continent. Nationalism could not be stopped. Germany and Italy were moving toward unification. But a new rivalry was emerging across Europe. It would eventually affect the entire world. The revolutions of 1848 had failed, but some leaders had learned from them. A new power was rising in Prussia. It would change the destiny of Germany. The German states slowly began to unite. Nationalism was becoming a political force. Europe was entering a new era, and the rivalry between the great powers was growing stronger. What was only a dream in 1848 became reality in 1871. Italy united as well. Nationalism was redrawing the map of Europe. But for every winner, there were losers. Multi-ethnic empires were beginning to shake. The changes that began in 1848 would lead Europe toward a world war only decades later. The revolutions of 1848 did not affect only Western Europe. The idea of nationalism was spreading into Ottoman lands as well. Across the Balkans, many peoples began questioning their identity and future. Similar challenges were emerging in the Austrian Empire. Different nations were demanding greater rights. This was the greatest legacy of 1848. Nationalism had become an unstoppable force across Europe. Historians gave the revolutions of 1848 a name: the Springtime of Nations. Because millions of people were demanding freedom, constitutions, and national unity. The revolutions were crushed, but the ideas survived. 1848 was not a failed revolution. It was the birth pain of modern Europe. After 1848, Europe began to change. No ruler could completely silence the voice of the people anymore. Many countries introduced constitutional reforms. Parliaments became increasingly important. Industry was growing, and cities were expanding. Europe was becoming the economic center of the world. But a new rivalry was emerging among the rising powers. This rivalry was preparing the stage for future conflicts. The transformation that began in 1789 had shaken all of Europe by 1848. Freedom, constitutional government, and nationalism became the most powerful ideas of the 19th century. But these ideas did not bring unity alone. They also created new rivalries and conflicts. The revolutions of 1848 came to an end, but their legacy continued to shape the 20th century and the modern world. Today, Germany, the economic engine of Europe, one of the world's most powerful industrial nations. But how did this great country come into existence? This story takes us back 2,000 years. Around 2,000 years ago, there was no country called Germany. Instead, hundreds of Germanic tribes lived among vast forests and rivers. Each tribe had its own leader. The Franks, the Saxons, the Alemanni, the Goths, and many other Germanic tribes. They were not united, yet the foundations of the future German people were slowly taking shape. To the south stood the most powerful state in the world, the Roman Empire. Soon, great struggles would begin between Rome and the Germanic tribes, and those struggles would write the first chapters of Germany's story. North of Rome, a vast and untamed world stretched across the land. Hundreds of Germanic tribes lived in these lands. There was no country called Germany yet. The Franks, the Saxons, the Goths, and Alemanni would help shape the future German people. But to the south stood a powerful neighbor, the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire was expanding northward. Its goal was to conquer Germania. The Romans built forts. They began bringing the region under their control. In 09 AD, a Germanic leader named Arminius emerged. In the Teutoburg forest, Roman legions were destroyed. The course of history changed forever. Centuries passed. Then Europe entered an age of great migration. The Huns arrived from the east, forcing many tribes to move. The Goths, Vandals, and many others spread across Europe. In 476, the Western Roman Empire fell. A new era began in Europe. After the fall of Rome, new powers began to rise. The Franks quickly gained power. They united many Germanic tribes. The Frankish kingdom expanded. It became one of Europe's strongest states. And soon, a ruler named Charlemagne would emerge. By the late 8th century, Charlemagne had become Europe's most powerful ruler. His armies conquered vast territories. His empire expanded rapidly. In the year 800, the Pope crowned Charlemagne as emperor. This empire would become one of the foundations of Germany's future. After Charlemagne's death, the empire began to weaken. Charlemagne's grandsons were fighting over the empire. To end the conflict, they came to an agreement. With the Treaty of Verdun in 823, the empire was divided into 3 parts. East Francia would eventually become Germany. According to many historians, the core of Germany was born here. East Francia continued to grow. A new German power was emerging. In 9, Otto was crowned emperor. Thus, the Holy Roman Empire was born, but it was not a single unified state. Hundreds of principalities and cities were ruled by their own leaders. This would delay German unification for centuries. For centuries, German cities grew. Trade and craftsmanship flourished. Merchants traded with regions across Europe. The cities became increasingly wealthy. In the north, the Hanseatic League rose to power. It controlled much of Baltic trade. German cities were growing rich, but the land remained divided into hundreds of states. In 1517, a German monk took a step that would change Europe forever. Martin Luther challenged the practices of the Church. His 95 Theses spread rapidly. Thanks to the printing press, Luther's ideas spread across Europe. The Reformation transformed Germany, but it also created new divisions. Tensions between Catholics and Protestants were rising. German lands were heading toward a new crisis. In 1618, an event triggered one of Europe's most devastating wars. The war lasted 30 years. Cities were destroyed and millions lost their lives. The war ended in 1648, but the German world lay in ruins. After the wars, a new German power began to rise. Its name was Prussia. It became famous for its discipline and army. Under Frederick the Great, Prussia became one of Europe's major powers. Soon, Prussia would change Germany's destiny forever. In the early 1800s, Napoleon was shaking Europe to its core. French armies entered German lands. The old order began to collapse. In 1806, the Holy Roman Empire came to an end. Napoleon destroyed an empire, but he also awakened German nationalism. After Napoleon's defeat, Europe's leaders gathered in Vienna. Their goal was to create a new order in Europe, and new borders were drawn. 39 German states were united within the German Confederation. But one question remained: who would lead the German world? In 1848, Europe was shaken by revolution once again. German nationalists wanted a united nation. For that purpose, the Frankfurt Parliament was convened. The parliament offered the German crown to the King of Prussia, but the king refused the offer. The attempt at unification had failed, but a new figure was stepping onto the stage: Otto von Bismarck. 1848 had failed, but the dream of German unity lived on. One major problem was the economy. German states taxed each other's trade. Led by Prussia, the Zollverein was established. Trade barriers began to disappear. Economic unity came first. Political unity would soon follow. There were two great powers in the German world, Prussia and Austria. Both wanted to lead, but Germany could have only one leader. The smaller German states began choosing sides. The balance of power was shifting. Unity still seemed far away, but history was approaching a great transformation. Meanwhile, Germany was changing. Industry was growing rapidly. Railways connected cities together. Distances grew smaller every year. As the economy grew stronger, the desire for unity grew as well. Germany was ready for unity. All it lacked was a strong leader. From the Germanic tribes to the rise of Prussia, the foundations of Germany had been laid. Now the stage belonged to one of history's most influential statesmen, Otto von Bismarck. Germany was not yet united. Dozens of states remained divided. In 1862, Otto von Bismarck stepped onto the stage. Bismarck had one goal: to create German unity. A new era was about to change Europe, the era of blood and iron. Major debates erupted in Parliament. The army budget had created a crisis. Bismarck stepped to the podium and delivered words that would enter history. Great questions are not decided by speeches, but by blood and iron. Bismarck's plan was clear. Unity would come through war. Bismarck made his first move. The target was Schleswig and Holstein. Prussia and Austria were allies. Together they marched against Denmark. War began in 1864. The Prussian army emerged victorious. But another plan lay behind the victory. Bismarck had already chosen his next rival. Denmark had been defeated. Now Austria was next. Disputes emerged between the allies. Schleswig and Holstein became a source of conflict. This was exactly what Bismarck wanted: to isolate Austria. As 1866 approached, Europe was moving toward another war. War began in 1866. Prussia and Austria were now enemies. The Prussian army had more modern weapons. They would change the course of the war. The decisive moment came at Königgrätz. Austria suffered a crushing defeat. It had lasted only 7 weeks, but Germany's future had changed forever. After the victory, Germany was reshaped. Prussia was now the undisputed leader. In 1867, the North German Confederation was established. Many German states had united, but Germany was not yet complete. The southern German states remained independent. One final obstacle stood before Bismarck. Prussia's rise worried Europe, especially France. Emperor Napoleon III did not want a powerful Germany. Bismarck knew this, and he would push France into making a mistake. The two leaders were heading toward confrontation. War was now very close. In 1870, a new crisis emerged. The Spanish throne shook Europe. France demanded guarantees from Prussia. King Wilhelm rejected the demands. A summary of the meeting was sent to Berlin. Bismarck shortened and sharpened the text. The EMS dispatch was published. France was outraged and declared war. By the summer of 1870, the war was raging. German armies advanced deep into France. At Sedan, the French army was surrounded. Its escape routes were closing. Emperor Napoleon III was trapped inside the encirclement. Defeat had become inevitable. On September 2, 1870, Napoleon III surrendered. Bismarck's dream of Germany was now within reach. The war did not end after Sedan. German armies marched toward Paris. The capital was under siege. Food shortages began to spread. Bismarck waited patiently. When Paris fell, Germany would be born. Months of siege finally paid off. French resistance was collapsing. While Paris remained under siege, German leaders gathered at the Palace of Versailles. Northern and southern German states were uniting behind one goal: a single Germany. Bismarck's long-term plan was succeeding. German unity had become inevitable. January 18, 1871 was approaching. A new European power was about to be born. January 18, 1871 had arrived. The Palace of Versailles was about to make history. The German princes reached a single decision. Unity was now official. King Wilhelm I of Prussia was proclaimed German emperor. Centuries of division had come to an end. Germany was now a single empire. Germany was united. Now it had to be governed. The empire's first chancellor was Otto von Bismarck. The new Germany industrialized rapidly. Iron, coal, and steel production surged. Germany became one of Europe's most powerful nations. As industry expanded, new problems emerged. Millions of workers labored under harsh conditions. Bismarck saw the danger. The workers' movement was growing stronger. New laws were introduced. Health insurance and social protection were established. One of the world's first modern welfare systems was emerging. Bismarck was strengthening Germany from within. Not all of Germany's problems were solved. A new struggle was beginning. Bismarck was concerned by the political influence of the Catholic Church. He believed the state should come first. New laws were introduced. A fierce struggle began between church and state. This period became known as the Kulturkampf. Bismarck strengthened state authority across Germany. Germany was now united. Bismarck's new goal was to preserve peace. France wanted revenge. Bismarck sought to keep it isolated. In 1873, the League of the Three Emperors was formed. Bismarck did not want war. He protected Germany's power through diplomacy. Bismarck continued expanding his alliance network. The balance of Europe had to be preserved. In 1882, a new alliance was formed. Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy joined together. During this period, Germany grew rapidly. Its economy and industry rose to the top of Europe. By the 1880s, Germany had become one of Europe's most powerful nations. The year 1888 became a turning point for Germany. Emperor Wilhelm I passed away. His son Frederick III succeeded him, but he was gravely ill. Just 99 days later, Frederick also died. Wilhelm II ascended the throne. The young emperor had different ideas. A clash with Bismarck was inevitable. Wilhelm II did not want to be a symbolic ruler. He wanted to govern Germany himself. The disagreement between Bismarck and Wilhelm grew. Two powerful personalities stood opposed. In 1890, Bismarck was forced to leave office. The architect of Germany was leaving the stage. A new era was beginning. Bismarck was gone. Wilhelm II gave Germany a new direction. Industry expanded. The military grew stronger. Germany became a world power. But Europe was dividing once again. Alliances and rivalries were growing rapidly. United Germany had been born, but soon the world would face one of the greatest wars in history. To be continued, from Germany to World War. In 1815, an era that had reshaped Europe came to an end. With Napoleon's defeat, a new order began to emerge across the continent. But for Italy, the future remained uncertain. Because Europe's leaders were about to decide Italy's future once again. In 1815, Europe's most powerful nations gathered in Vienna. Their goal was to build a new order after Napoleon. Italy's future was also being reshaped during these meetings. But the decisions would not create a united Italy. After the Congress of Vienna, Italy was divided into small states once again. Piedmont, the Papal States, and the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies controlled different parts of the peninsula. Even people speaking the same language continued living under different borders. The dream of a united Italy still seemed distant, but it would not remain that way forever. One of the biggest winners of the Congress of Vienna was Austria. Important regions of northern Italy came under direct Austrian control. Milan and Venice were now governed from Vienna. As foreign rule expanded, Italian nationalism quietly began to grow. Many Italians were beginning to see themselves as part of one nation rather than separate states. Writers and thinkers began spreading the idea of a shared language and history. For the first time, a powerful question emerged. Why not one Italy? This idea would soon grow into a movement. One of the first movements behind this cause was a secret society known as the Carbon. Its members secretly swore oaths and organized against Austrian influence. They quickly gained supporters across many parts of Italy. Soon, they would try to turn their ideas into action. In 1820, the first major spark appeared in Naples. Carbonari members mobilized the people by demanding constitutional reforms. Faced with mounting pressure, the king was forced to back down. For a moment, it seemed that change was possible. But the leaders in Vienna watched these events with growing concern. Austria moved quickly to prevent the revolts from spreading. The inexperienced rebels struggled against a professional army. The uprising was crushed, but the ideas survived. The events in Naples quickly spread to Piedmont. Military officers and reformers began pushing for change. Some were no longer dreaming of reform alone, but of a united Italy. But once again, Austria was preparing to intervene. In the spring of 1821, the Austrian army moved once again. The rebels were outmatched in both numbers and experience. The resistance quickly began to collapse. Once again, hopes for change had been postponed. After the uprisings, a harsh period of repression began. Many revolutionaries were arrested or imprisoned. Others left Italy and began lives in exile. But those forced into exile had no intention of giving up the struggle. At this moment, a new figure began to emerge. Giuseppe Mazzini. Italy should not only be free, but united. He wanted to transform nationalism into a movement of the people. Soon, his ideas would echo across the entire peninsula. In 1831, Mazzini founded the Young Italy movement. The goal was clear: a free, united and independent Italy. The ideas began crossing borders. Young people were joining the cause. For the first time, the dream of a united Italy was reaching the masses. Mazzini's calls soon began turning into action. Throughout the 1830s, several uprisings erupted across Italy. But most of these revolts were poorly prepared and quickly crushed. Defeats continued, but the idea of unification could no longer be stopped. Each new uprising pushed Austria to impose even harsher measures. Secret societies were hunted down and meetings were broken apart. Hundreds of nationalists were imprisoned or forced into exile. But the greater the repression, the stronger the resistance became. During the 1830s and 1840s, Europe was changing rapidly. New ideas were crossing borders faster than ever before. Demands for liberty, constitutions, and nationalism were rising everywhere. Italy too was beginning to feel the approach of a great storm. In 1848, Europe erupted once again. The revolutionary wave quickly spread across the continent. Italian nationalists believed this was the opportunity they had been waiting for. Soon, the entire peninsula would be shaken by uprisings. In March 1848, the first major explosion came in Milan. After days of fighting, Austrian forces withdrew from the city. Soon afterward, Venice also rose against Austrian rule. For the first time, unification seemed like a real possibility. King Charles Albert of Piedmont decided he could wait no longer. He sent his army to fight against Austria. Many Italians believed this war would begin the path to unification. But Austria was far from accepting defeat. By 1849, the first attempt at unification had suffered a major setback. Austria regained control of most of the territories it had lost. But the nationalism that had grown for decades could no longer be reversed. A united Italy had not yet been born, but the struggle was only beginning. The revolutions of 1848 had failed, but the ideas survived. a new generation refused to abandon the dream of a united Italy. This time, attention began turning toward the Kingdom of Piedmont. Soon, a new leader would emerge and change the course of the unification struggle. After 1849, many revolutions collapsed, but Piedmont remained standing. King Victor Emmanuel II chose to preserve constitutional government. This turned Piedmont into the natural center of Italian nationalism. The hope of unification would now rely on state power rather than secret societies. The idea of unity was growing, yet Italy remained divided into many separate states. In the north, Lombardy and Venice remained under Austrian control. At the center stood the Papal States. The Pope had no desire to lose his political power. The Kingdom of the Two Sicilies was equally determined to preserve its rule. The road to unification would be far more difficult than it seemed. By the 1850s, Italy was still divided. But the struggle no longer rested solely on the shoulders of revolutionaries. Soon, three men would change the course of history: Cavour, Victor, Emmanuel, and Garibaldi. A united Italy was still a dream, but the day that dream would become reality was no longer far away. The story of Italian unification continues. Don't forget to subscribe to Chronology of Existence. 1815. Napoleon was defeated, but his greatest legacy was not his army, it was an idea. The Congress of Vienna divided Italy into small states once again. The old order had returned. Austria ruled the north, the Papal States controlled the center, and the Bourbons governed the south. Italy remained divided. But a new dream had begun to spread across the peninsula, one united Italy. The Congress of Vienna had divided Italy once again, but the idea of freedom could no longer be stopped. Secret societies began to emerge across the peninsula. These secret groups, known as the Carbonari, fought against foreign rule and kept alive the dream of a united Italy. Austria crushed even the smallest uprisings. Arrests, exile, and executions failed to stop the growing nationalist movement. Every failed rebellion created new heroes, and the dream of one Italy grew stronger in the hearts of the people. In 1831, a young visionary emerged. His name was Giuseppe Mazzini. He believed Italy should not only unite, but become a free nation. Mazzini founded the Young Italy movement. Its mission was to unite the people under a single flag. His ideas quickly spread across the peninsula. Young Italians embraced the dream of a united Italy. A symbolic map of Italy, slowly glowing as city lights connect from north to south. Hopeful sunrise, cinematic masterpiece, ultra-realistic, 16:9. Mazzini's call soon sparked uprisings, but Italy was not yet strong enough to unite. The Austrian army crushed the revolts. Hundreds of revolutionaries were killed or imprisoned. Mazzini was forced into exile, but exile did not end his struggle. Even far from Italy, his writings continued to inspire the nation. The dream of unity had become impossible to erase. In 1848, Europe erupted once again. From Paris to Vienna, Berlin to Milan, revolution swept across the continent. The people of Milan rose against the Austrian army. 5 days of street fighting turned the world's attention toward Italy. King Charles Albert of Sardinia made a historic decision. By declaring war on Austria, he took the first major step toward Italian unification. For the first time, thousands of volunteers from different Italian states marched side by side. A nation was beginning to take shape. In the summer of 1848, the Sardinian army confronted Austria at Custassa. Italy's future would be decided on this battlefield. Field Marshal Radetzky expertly commanded the Austrian army. The Italian forces suffered a devastating defeat. King Charles Albert was forced to retreat. The dream of unification had been postponed once again. But the struggle was far from over. Defeat did not break the Italian spirit. Soon, two new leaders would change history, Cavour and Garibaldi. In 1849, the Battle of Novara was lost. Italy's dream of unification suffered another devastating blow. After the defeat, King Charles Albert abdicated. His son, Victor Emmanuel II, became the new king. The new king refused to surrender. The Kingdom of Sardinia became the strongest hope for a united Italy. At that moment, an extraordinary statesman stepped onto the stage. Camillo Cavour was preparing the strategy that would change Italy's destiny. In 1852, Camillo Cavour became Prime Minister of Sardinia. He believed Italy could be united not only through war, but through smart diplomacy. He strengthened his kingdom first. Railways expanded, factories were built, and Sardinia quickly became a modern, European state. Cavour began winning the support of Europe's great powers against Austria. The battle would now be fought through diplomacy as well. Soon, a secret meeting with Emperor Napoleon III of France would take place. That agreement would change Italy's destiny forever. In 1858, Cavour secretly met Emperor Napoleon III in the town of Plumieres. Their meeting would change the future of Europe. Under the agreement, France would support Sardinia if Austria attacked. In return, Nice and Savoy would be ceded to France. Cavour had a clear objective: provoke Austria into striking first, forcing France into the war. The plan worked. Austria delivered an ultimatum to Sardinia. Europe stood on the brink of another war. In the spring of 1859, war began. French and Sardinian forces advanced together against Austria. At the Battle of Magenta, Austria suffered a major defeat. The gates of Lombardy were finally opened. Then came the Battle of Solferino. Tens of thousands of soldiers clashed in one of Europe's bloodiest battles. The horrors of Solferino changed more than the course of war. They inspired the creation of the Red Cross years later. Despite the victories, an unexpected turn followed. Napoleon III signed the Armistice of Villafranca with Austria. The decision enraged Cavour, believing Italy's chance for unity had been lost. He resigned as prime minister. But the people thought differently. Referendums in Tuscany, Parma, Modena, and Rumonia overwhelmingly supported joining the Kingdom of Sardinia. Italy was uniting not only through war, but through the will of its people. Yet the South remained a world apart. In 1860, Giuseppe Garibaldi made a bold decision. With around 1,000 volunteers, he sailed to liberate Sicily. Garibaldi and his red shirts landed at Marsala. They were few in number, but their determination was immense. At the Battle of Calatafimi, Garibaldi's volunteers forced the Bourbon army to retreat. The victory inspired Italians across the peninsula. The people of Sicily welcomed Garibaldi as a liberator. A united Italy was no longer just a dream, it was becoming reality. After Sicily, Garibaldi did not stop. He crossed the Strait of Messina with his volunteer army and reached mainland Italy. The Bourbon government rapidly collapsed. Garibaldi entered Naples with little resistance. King Francis II left the capital. Bourbon rule in southern Italy was nearing its end. Most of Italy was now united, but the most important decision about the nation's future was yet to be made. On October 26, 1860, Garibaldi and King Victor Emmanuel II met near Tino in one of history's most symbolic encounters. Garibaldi did not claim the conquered lands for himself. Instead, he handed them over to the future Kingdom of Italy. Despite becoming a national hero, Garibaldi sought no power or title. He quietly returned to private life. Italy was now close to unification, but Venice and Rome still remained outside the new kingdom. On March 17, 1861, the historic moment arrived. Parliament officially proclaimed the Kingdom of Italy. Victor Emmanuel II became the first king of a united Italy. Centuries of division were finally coming to an end. Yet unification was still incomplete. Venice remained under Austrian rule, while Rome was controlled by the Papal States. The Kingdom of Italy had been born, but two great objectives still remained: Venice and Rome. In 1866, Europe was once again at war. Prussia confronted Austria, and Italy joined Prussia in hopes of reclaiming Venice. The Italian army was defeated once again at Custoza. It seemed the dream of Venice had slipped away. But Prussia changed the course of the war. At Königgrätz, Austria suffered a crushing defeat and was forced to seek peace. After the peace agreement, Austria ceded Venice to Italy. Only one goal remained: Rome. In 1870, war broke out between France and Prussia. France was forced to withdraw the troops protecting Rome. Italy seized the opportunity. The Royal Army marched toward Rome. On September 20, 1870, the walls at Porta Pia were breached. After brief fighting, Rome came under Italian control. After centuries of division, Italy was finally complete. Rome had become the heart of a united nation. In 1871, Rome was officially declared the capital of the Kingdom of Italy. The long-awaited unification was finally complete. Not everyone accepted the new reality. Pope Pius IX refused to recognize the Kingdom of Italy and withdrew into the Vatican. Political unity had been achieved, yet deep economic and social divisions between northern and southern Italy still remained. Italy was finally one nation, but the journey toward becoming a strong and united country had only just begun. Italy's unification changed more than the peninsula. A new European power had emerged. Italy's success also accelerated Germany's path to unification. Europe had entered the age of nationalism. But the rise of new nations also brought rivalry, industrialization, colonial competition, and militarization were pushing Europe toward a new era. Italy had finally united, but even greater storms awaited Europe. A new century would bring wars that would reshape the world. After centuries of division, Italy finally united beneath a single flag. Mazzini's vision, Cavour's diplomacy, Garibaldi's courage, and Victor Emmanuel's leadership changed the course of history. With Italy's unification, European rivalry entered a new era. The rising powers now turned their eyes toward the rich lands of Africa. The meeting in Berlin had ended, but for Africa, the real storm was just beginning. Europe's empires would wait no longer. Whoever arrived first would claim the land. But Africa was still home to powerful kingdoms, and not all of them would surrender. The Zulu warriors, the Ashanti kingdom, the Mahdist armies, and Ethiopia were preparing to fight for Africa's future. After the Berlin Conference, Europe wasted no time. Its empires began moving into different regions of Africa simultaneously. Britain expanded from north to south. France pushed inland from the west, while other European powers searched for their own share. But Africa was never an empty continent. Powerful kingdoms had stood here for centuries. And some of these kingdoms were determined to defend their lands. Africa's resistance was about to begin. In southern Africa, there stood a kingdom far stronger than Europe expected, the kingdom of Zulu. Under King Sechueo, the Zulu army was renowned for its discipline and courage. They had no intention of surrendering their homeland. Every warrior was trained from childhood. The Zulu army was one of the most disciplined military forces in Africa. But very soon, this powerful kingdom would face the British Empire. January 22nd, 1879, the British Army had established a camp beneath Isandwana Mountain. Everything appeared calm. Beyond the horizon, thousands of Zulu warriors moved silently. The British had no idea what was approaching. The Zulu commanders used a battle formation that would become legendary. The Buffalo Horns formation was closing around the British camp. Within hours, one of the world's most powerful armies would suffer one of the greatest shocks in its history. By the end of the day, the British camp at Isandwana had fallen. The British Army had suffered a defeat it never expected. The news reaching London shocked the British Empire. No one had expected the Zulu army to achieve such a victory. This victory became one of Africa's greatest military successes against a European power. The Kingdom of Zululand had demonstrated its strength to the world. But the British Empire would not accept this defeat. A much larger army was already on its way to southern Africa. The defeat at Isandwana was unacceptable to the British Empire. London dispatched thousands of reinforcements to southern Africa. This time, British commanders would not repeat their mistakes. Every movement was carefully planned. Within months, the British army advanced once again. Their objective was the heart of the Zulu kingdom. King Cetshwayo knew the final battle was approaching. At Ulundi, the fate of the Zulu kingdom would be decided. July 4th, 1879. The two armies met for one final battle on the plains of Ulundi. The Zulu warriors advanced once again with extraordinary courage, but this time they faced an army fully prepared for battle. Britain's new tactics and superior firepower changed the course of the battle. After Ulundi, the Zulu kingdom lost its independence, but its resistance became one of the enduring symbols of African history. As the Zulu kingdom fell, a new resistance was rising. In northeastern Africa, Sudan was beginning to rise. Muhammad Ahmad declared himself to be the Mahdi. Within a short time, thousands rallied to his cause, joined the movement one after another. A massive uprising had begun against Egyptian and British authority. The objective was clear: Khartoum, and one of the most important sieges in African history. Farsai, Lanmatinin, 1884. The Mahdist forces laid siege to Khartoum. The city's defense was led by General Charles Gordon. He waited for reinforcements, but time was running out. After months of siege, the city became completely isolated. Khartoum was cut off from the outside world. In early 1885, Khartoum fell. The victory echoed across the world. As much of Africa fell under colonial rule, one nation remained independent: Ethiopia. Emperor Menelik II recognized the coming danger from across the country. Tens of thousands of warriors answered his call. Italy believed Ethiopia would fall like many other African states. It was a grave miscalculation. In 1896, near the town of Adwa, one of the most important battles in African history was about to begin. March 1st, 1896. In the mountains of Adwa, two armies met in a battle that would change history. Emperor Menelik II advanced with an army gathered from every corner of Ethiopia. The nation was determined to defend its independence. Italian commanders expected an easy victory, but Ethiopia's mountains would become their greatest challenge. By the end of the day, victory belonged to Ethiopia. Adwa became a symbol of Africa's fight for freedom. The victory at Adwa became more than Ethiopia's triumph. It became a symbol of hope for all of Africa. The news quickly spread across Europe. The world was talking about an African nation defeating a European army. By 1914, almost all of Africa had come under European control. The greatest exception was Ethiopia. The colonization of Africa changed the map forever, but the struggle for freedom never truly ended. While wars continued across Africa, in the Congo, a quieter, yet far more ruthless system was taking shape. Every village was required to collect fixed rubber quotas, month after month. Those quotas kept increasing. People spent most of their days deep in the forest, fields were abandoned, and village life began to change. Rubber from the Congo was fueling Europe's growing industries, but the price was paid by the people of the Congo. As rubber quotas increased, village life began to collapse. People no longer worked for their own fields, but for the demands of the colonial system. Fields were left empty, food became scarce, hunger and disease began spreading through many parts of the Congo. This was not only economic exploitation, the daily life of a society, its families, its security, and its future were being torn apart. English, in Europe, rubber symbolized the modern world, but in the Congo, that same rubber became a symbol of unimaginable suffering for millions. Britain's ambition was far greater than acquiring new territory. Cecil Rhodes dreamed of an empire stretching from Cape Town to Cairo. The project became known as Cape to Cairo. Its goal was an unbroken British corridor across Africa. Railways, telegraph lines, and new colonial outposts would become the foundation of this grand vision. But standing in the way was another European power, France. The two empires were about to confront each other in the heart of Africa. In 1898, a small town in Africa captured the world's attention. Its name was Fashoda. On one side stood the British Army, on the other, the French expedition. Two great empires claimed the same land. Across Europe, war seemed possible. A single wrong decision could have ignited an international conflict. In the end, France agreed to withdraw. Britain further strengthened its dominance in Africa. By the end of the 19th century, gold and diamonds had been discovered in South Africa. Almost overnight, the region became one of the world's most valuable territories. These lands were home to the Boer republics. Britain wanted control over this immense wealth. In 1899, war erupted. Britain launched a massive military campaign to seize control of the region. When the war ended, Britain emerged victorious, but the cost was immense for both the Boer people and Africa. At the beginning of the 20th century, Germany was expanding its African colonies. One of its most important possessions was German Southwest Africa. Land seizures and harsh colonial policies deepened the anger of the Herero and Nama peoples. The conflict that began in 1904 displaced thousands of people. The humanitarian catastrophe is regarded by many historians as one of the cursed genocides of the modern era. By 1914, almost the entire African continent had been divided. Only Ethiopia and Liberia remained independent. By 1914, nearly 90% of Africa was under European colonial rule. Borders changed. Kingdoms disappeared. New colonial administrations emerged. Yet those borders would continue shaping Africa for generations. But colonial rule could not extinguish the will of Africa's people. In the 20th century, independence movements would spread across the continent. The scramble for Africa changed the destiny of an entire continent, but history does not end here. In the next episode, we will witness Africa's long road to independence.
Chronology of existence. Chronology of existence. We were built to last through time.
The year was 1441. Life in West Africa began like any other day. But no one knew a catastrophe was approaching, one that would change the fate of millions forever. The Portuguese ships on the horizon were searching for more than new trade routes. They were about to ignite one of the greatest forced migrations in human history. Villages were raided, families were torn apart. Those bound in chains had no idea they would never see their homes again. Over the next 4 centuries, millions of Africans would be forced across the Atlantic in chains. This was more than a slave trade, was a turning point that reshaped continents. Slavery was as old as civilization itself. From ancient Egypt to the Roman Empire, countless societies relied on forced labor, but the system that emerged in the 15th century would surpass anything the world had seen before. This time, it was no longer about a handful of captives. A vast trading network linking Europe, Africa, and the Americas was taking shape. Millions would become human cargo bound for lands across the Atlantic. In 1441, Portuguese sailors reached the coast of West Africa seeking gold and new trade routes. Before long, they discovered a trade they considered even more profitable: the trade in human lives. As sugar, tobacco, and cotton plantations expanded, so did the demand for labor. That demand would reshape the lives of millions of Africans over the next 4 centuries. The Portuguese were not alone on the West African coast. They established trade with powerful African kingdoms and merchants. At first, the focus was gold, ivory, and spices. Soon, however, human lives became part of the negotiations. Europeans offered firearms, gunpowder, textiles, and manufactured goods. In return, they received prisoners of war, criminals, and captives taken from rival tribes. The trade rapidly expanded. Some African kingdoms grew wealthy through this trade, but Europe's endless demand fueled competition. Armed with European weapons, kingdoms launched wars against their neighbors to capture more prisoners. Victory was no longer the only goal. Villages were burned, people were captured, and thousands of prisoners were marched in chains toward the Atlantic coast. The Atlantic slave trade was becoming a system that seemed impossible to stop. As Europe's demand for slaves grew, human hunting spread across Africa's interior. Some raids followed wars, while others were launched solely to capture more people. Captured men, women, and children were forced to march hundreds of kilometers. Many died from hunger, disease, and exhaustion before ever reaching the ocean. Those who survived were taken to slave forts along the Atlantic coast. These fortresses became the last places where millions would ever know freedom. Inside dark stone dungeons, captives waited for days, or even weeks. Chained together, they had no idea where they were going or if they would survive. For many, this was their final glimpse of freedom. Once they reached the Atlantic coast, captives were no longer seen as people, but as merchandise. Negotiations lasting for days exchanged human lives for firearms, textiles, gunpowder, and other trade goods. Slave traders inspected every captive individually. Teeth, muscles, age, and physical condition were examined as the strongest individuals were selected to fetch the highest prices. Before boarding the ships, many captives were shaved and branded with hot irons. The mark declared that they were no longer free people, but the property of a slave trader. Then came the most heartbreaking moment. Families were torn apart as Chained captives were forced aboard waiting ships. For most, it would be the last time they ever saw their homeland or their loved ones. The ship's lower deck was transformed into cramped wooden compartments where even breathing was difficult. Hundreds of people remained chained together for weeks with almost no room to move. Crossing the Atlantic often took 1 to 3 months. Storms, disease, and starvation claimed thousands of lives before the journey was even over. Each day, captives were briefly brought onto the deck. They were not allowed fresh air out of compassion, but to keep them alive and valuable enough to be sold. Beyond the horizon lay only the endless ocean. Behind them was the homeland they would never see again. Ahead awaited an unknown world from which there would be no return. Days turned into weeks. In the middle of the Atlantic, the ships moved through storms, hunger, and fear. No one knew when the journey would end. The lower decks were dark, humid, and airless. Sometimes no people were needed to tell the story. The narrow corridors and shadows said everything. By morning, only exhausted silence remained on the deck. The ocean stretched endlessly as the ship continued along one of history's darkest routes. Africa faded farther away with each passing day. Only the sea remained on the horizon. For millions, this journey became a separation with no return. After weeks at sea, the ships finally reached the ports of the Caribbean and the Americas. But this was not the end of the journey. It was the beginning of a new life in bondage. At the ports, people were inspected, one by one, and valued according to their age and physical strength. Within minutes, an entire life could pass into the hands of a new owner. The auctions were more than places where people were sold. They were where families were separated forever. Husbands, wives, children, and siblings were often purchased by different owners. Those who survived now stood in an unfamiliar world. Years of exhausting labor, oppression, and uncertainty lay ahead. The voyage had ended, but slavery had only just begun. Across the Americas, vast plantations of sugarcane, tobacco, and cotton stretched for miles. Their entire economy depended on forced labor. Work began before sunrise and often continued until sunset. Extreme heat, exhausting labor, and constant fatigue turned every day into a struggle for survival. Freshly cut sugarcane was rushed to the mills, where it was crushed and processed into one of Europe's most valuable commodities. Human labor powered an expanding global economy. Even when the day ended, freedom did not begin. The next sunrise would bring the same fields, the same routine, and the same struggle. For many, this cycle lasted a lifetime. Not everyone accepted their fate under the cover of darkness. Some escaped into the forests. Ahead lay the unknown wilderness. Behind them, the fear of capture. Those who escaped established hidden communities deep within mountains and forests. There, they struggled for years to protect the freedom they had reclaimed. Plantation owners organized armed patrols to stop escapes. Capturing fugitives became a way to intimidate everyone who remained. Despite unimaginable oppression, the hope of freedom never disappeared. Some escaped, some resisted, and others fought, so future generations might one day live free. Despite everything, they refused to forget their past. At night, elders passed down their language, stories, and traditions to the next generation. Music and rhythm were more than entertainment. They preserved hope and united people who shared the same suffering. Every sunrise brought the same hardships, yet the dream of freedom never completely disappeared. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the trade continued to expand. Hundreds of ships followed the same route each year, making the slave trade one of the most profitable systems in the global economy. The Atlantic slave trade became one of the largest trading systems in history. Ships sailed from Europe to Africa, transported enslaved people to the Americas, and returned to Europe carrying plantation goods. As sugar, cotton, coffee, cocoa, and tobacco reached European ports, immense fortunes were created. Behind every shipment stood plantations, sustained by forced labor. Ports such as London, Lisbon, Bordeaux, and Amsterdam grew, wealthy through this trade. Every ship crossing the Atlantic became part of an expanding global economy. On one side stood growing wealth, on the other, endless human labor. The Atlantic slave trade transformed not only millions of lives, but also the course of the global economy. Despite years of oppression, the desire for freedom never disappeared. Secret meetings were held, escape plans were made, and resistance continued to grow. At the same time, powerful voices against slavery began to emerge across Europe. Newspapers, books, and pamphlets questioned the morality of the slave trade. After years of debate, several nations began banning the slave trade. Yet even after new laws were passed, illegal trafficking continued for many years. As the Atlantic slave trade slowly came to an end, it left behind millions of shattered lives. Its consequences would outlast the ships themselves by generations. In 1807, Britain outlawed the Atlantic slave trade. The Royal Navy began intercepting illegal slave ships across the Atlantic, but the law did not end the trade overnight. Despite the ban, illegal trafficking continued for years. Under the cover of darkness, ships unloaded their human cargo at remote colonial harbors. Although the trade declined, the plantation system remained. Millions were still denied their freedom as entire economies continued to rely on their labor. After decades of struggle, slavery was abolished in many countries. Yet what remained behind were not only broken chains, but wounds that would last for generations. Over 4 centuries, millions were taken from Africa. Entire regions lost population, productivity, and opportunities for future development. The consequences lasted for generations. Across the Atlantic, Europe was rapidly industrializing and growing, wealthier. Expanding ports, trade routes, and factories reshaped the balance of the global economy. As the slave trade declined, Europe's interest in Africa did not disappear. This time, the goal was no longer people, but the continent itself and its vast natural resources. The Atlantic slave trade had come to an end, but for Africa, a new chapter was just beginning. Soon, the European powers would return not to buy people, but to divide an entire continent. In 1492, the world stood on the edge of change. No one knew that a small fleet sailing into the Atlantic would forever alter the course of human history. Christopher Columbus sailed west, hoping to reach Asia. Instead, he was about to encounter something far greater than he had ever imagined. At the time, Europeans did not truly know the shape of the world, or what lay beyond the ocean. Their maps were incomplete, and the unknown inspired both fear and curiosity. This voyage would lead to far more than the discovery of new lands. It would raise empires, destroy civilizations, and lay the foundations of the modern world. For centuries, Europe's wealth depended on the East. Silk, spices, and precious goods traveled thousands of kilometers before reaching European markets. After the Ottoman conquest of Constantinople in 1453, Europe's trade routes changed dramatically. Commerce with the East became more expensive and increasingly difficult. Europe's kingdoms searched for another solution. If the overland routes to Asia had become difficult, perhaps the ocean offered a new path. Portugal explored the coast of Africa. At the same time, Spain prepared to support a far bolder idea, sailing west across the Atlantic. For years, many rulers rejected Columbus's proposal, but in 1492, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of Spain decided to give him one final chance. Columbus believed the Earth was smaller than it actually was. He was convinced that sailing west would lead directly to Asia. In August 1492, the Santa Maria, Pinta, and Nina left the harbor. No one aboard knew what awaited them beyond the Atlantic. Columbus was searching for Asia. Instead, his voyage would unknowingly change the destiny of two worlds forever. Days turned into weeks. As the ships crossed the endless Atlantic, the crews slowly began to lose hope. Many sailors demanded to return. Others believed only death awaited beyond the ocean. The threat of mutiny grew stronger each day. Columbus refused to change course. He remained convinced that land lay ahead and persuaded his crew to continue. On the morning of October 12, 1492, the long-awaited moment arrived. Land appeared on the horizon. The crew believed they had reached Asia, but they had actually arrived at the threshold of an entirely new continent. On October 12, 1492, Columbus and his crew landed on an island in the Bahamas. Yet they still believed they had reached the eastern shores of Asia. The island was home to the Taino people. They welcomed the newcomers peacefully, offering food, water, and small gifts. What caught Columbus's attention most was gold. Every rumor of greater riches pushed him to continue exploring. Columbus continued exploring the islands for months. Without realizing it, he had opened the gateway to an entirely new world for Europe. After months at sea, Columbus returned to Spain. His news electrified not only the royal court, but all of Europe. Columbus presented gold, exotic plants, and stories from the newly discovered lands. Spain now believed even greater discoveries were within reach. Columbus's return sparked a new age of exploration. Spain launched expedition after expedition, and the Atlantic became a gateway to opportunity rather than a barrier. Before long, Spain was no longer alone. Other European kingdoms would soon join the race to claim the riches of the New World. After Columbus returned, Spain and Portugal both claimed the newly discovered lands. Europe's two greatest maritime powers stood on the brink of conflict. In 1494, the Treaty of Tordesillas produced an extraordinary decision. Most of the still unknown world was divided between two kingdoms. Under the treaty, Portugal focused on routes through Africa toward Asia, while Spain expanded westward into the newly discovered lands. the treaty would have an unexpected consequence. Before long, Portugal would reach a vast land on the eastern coast of South America territory that would become Brazil. In 1500, Portuguese navigator Pedro Álvares Cabral sailed across the Atlantic on his way to India, but unexpected winds carried his fleet farther west than planned. The vast coastline on the horizon belonged to eastern South America. By chance, Portugal had made one of the greatest discoveries in its history. Portugal claimed the land for its crown. Under the Treaty of Tordesillas, Brazil officially became part of the Portuguese Empire. The two maritime empires now followed different paths. Portugal focused on global trade routes, while Spain prepared to push deeper into the Americas. Only a few decades after Columbus's voyage, Spanish explorers reached the heart of the Americas. There they encountered one of the greatest civilizations of the age, the mighty Aztec Empire. In Iwo-Jima, Hernán-Cortes, and only a few hundred soldiers, began one of history's boldest expeditions. Though vastly outnumbered, they set their sights on the powerful Aztec Empire. Emperor Moctezuma II watched the newcomers carefully. The first meetings appeared peaceful, but neither side truly understood the other's intentions. Gold captured the Spaniards' attention above all else. That wealth would soon ignite one of the greatest conquests in history. Cortes did not fight alone. Many indigenous nations that opposed Aztec rule joined the Spanish. Their alliance would change the course of history. In 1521, Tenochtitlan came under siege. After weeks of relentless fighting, one of the greatest cities in the Americas began to fall. War was only part of the disaster. Disease and famine devastated the empire as well. The mighty Aztec state disappeared into history. With the fall of the Aztec Empire, Spain took its first great step toward becoming the dominant colonial power in the New World. But this was only the beginning. Far to the south, an even larger empire still stood. After the fall of the Aztec Empire, Spanish ambitions turned south. High in the Andes stood one of the greatest civilizations of the Americas, the Inca Empire. In 1532, Francisco Pizarro entered Inca territory with only a few hundred soldiers. Waiting ahead was an empire of millions. Emperor Atahualpa agreed to meet the strangers. But what seemed like diplomacy would become one of history's greatest ambushes. The attack at Cajamarca lasted only a few hours. Atahualpa was captured, and the fate of the Inca Empire was changed forever. To secure his freedom, Atahualpa offered one of the greatest ransoms in history. He promised to fill one room with gold and 2 more with silver. 4 months, Inca treasures were collected. Priceless works of art were melted into gold bars, ready to be shipped across the Atlantic. Despite the ransom being paid, Atahualpa was never released. After a brief trial, he was executed, leaving the Inca leadership in ruins. With the fall of the Inca Empire, Spain became the dominant power across much of the Americas. These conquests transformed not only continents, but also the global balance of wealth and power. Spain gained far more than new territories. Gold and silver flowing from the Americas began to reshape the global economy. Precious metals were not the only things crossing the Atlantic. Potatoes, maize, tomatoes, cacao, and tobacco transformed European agriculture and daily life forever. In return, horses, cattle, wheat, and new farming practices reached the Americas. The two continents were now transforming one another forever. Farsala at the greatest cost, was paid by the indigenous peoples. Diseases brought from Europe claimed millions of lives, permanently transforming the population of the Americas. Spain's enormous wealth did not go unnoticed. Soon, England, France, and the Netherlands also crossed the Atlantic, determined to claim their share of the New World. In 1607, England founded Jamestown, its first permanent colony in North America. This small settlement marked the beginning of a nation yet to be born. In 1620, the Pilgrims arrived aboard the Mayflower and settled at Plymouth. Their search for religious freedom helped fuel the rapid growth of England's colonies. Over the following decades, the English colonies spread rapidly along the Atlantic coast. Their expansion would soon lead to a decisive struggle with France for control of North America. By the mid-18th century, North America was divided between two great European powers. Britain dominated the eastern coast, while France controlled the vast interior. War erupted in 1754. Britain and France were not alone. Both sides fought alongside indigenous allies in a struggle that would shape the future of North America. The fall of Quebec in 1759 changed the course of the war. Soon after, France was forced to surrender most of its North American territories to Britain. Britain had won the war, but victory came at an enormous cost. To pay its massive debts, the British government turned its attention to the American colonies. After the war, Britain faced enormous debt. The government in London decided that the American colonies should help pay the cost of victory. The new taxes sparked outrage across the colonies. The colonists believed it was unjust to be taxed by a parliament in which they had no representation. In 1773, hundreds of chests of tea were thrown into Boston Harbor. The protest became an open challenge to British authority. The chances for compromise were fading fast. The colonies began preparing for war, and within a few years, one of history's most significant struggles for independence would begin. On the morning of April 19, 1775, two armies faced each other at Lexington, Massachusetts. No one knew that within minutes, history would change forever. When the first shots were fired, there was no turning back. The battles of Lexington and Concord marked the beginning of the American Revolutionary War. Representatives of the colonies gathered once again in Philadelphia. Their goal was no longer simply to defend their rights, but to shape a common future. Congress created the Continental Army and appointed George Washington as its commander. Ahead lay a long and difficult war against one of the world's most powerful empires. On July 4, 1776, the Continental Congress gathered in Philadelphia to proclaim not just a rebellion, but the birth of a new nation. Written by Thomas Jefferson, the Declaration of Independence proclaimed that governments derive their power from the consent of the governed, and that people possess fundamental rights. Once the signatures were placed on the document, there was no turning back. The 13 colonies had formally declared their separation from the British Empire. The Declaration of Independence was more than the founding document of the United States. It became one of history's most influential statements on popular sovereignty and individual rights, inspiring democratic movements around the world. After years of war, the decisive moment arrived. In 1781, American and French forces surrounded the British Army at Yorktown. The surrender of General Charles Cornwallis changed the course of the war. Britain had largely lost its chance to regain control of the colonies. The Treaty of Paris in 1783 officially recognized the independence of the United States. After years of conflict, A new nation had entered the world stage. The war had been won, but the greatest challenge was only beginning. The young republic now had to transform its hard-won independence into a stable and enduring nation. Independence had been won, but the new nation still needed a government. In 1787, delegates gathered in Philadelphia to draft one of the most influential constitutional systems in modern history. The new constitution established a balance between the legislative, executive, and judicial branches, creating a strong federal government for the young republic. In 1789, George Washington took the oath as the first president of the United States. The new nation had become a functioning state, not just an idea. America's story did not end here. Ahead lay westward expansion, civil war, and the rise of a global superpower. That journey continues in America, Part 2. America had won its independence, but the greatest challenge was only beginning. The young republic would either disappear into history or change the world forever. The war was over, but winning freedom was far easier than building a nation strong enough to survive. In the 1790s, America was nothing like the nation we know today. It was a narrow strip of land along the Atlantic, surrounded by powerful empires. Ahead lay unexplored lands, wars, and impossible choices. This journey would transform a small republic into a global power. In 1789, George Washington took the oath as the first president of the United States. The hero of the Revolution now faced the challenge of shaping a new nation. The new Constitution was now in effect, but building a stable government would not be easy. Congress and the presidency were working together for the very first time. The young republic remained fragile. Britain controlled the north, Spain held the south, and the vast Louisiana territory blocked America's path to the west. As America looked westward, a new leader was rising in Europe. A single decision he would make would forever change the destiny of the United States. By 1803, Europe stood on the brink of another great war. Napoleon Bonaparte was preparing to focus all of France's strength on the battles ahead. France controlled the vast Louisiana territory, stretching from the Mississippi River to the Rocky Mountains. It was one of the most strategic regions in North America. War was draining France's treasury. Napoleon urgently needed money, and defending distant lands across the Atlantic was becoming increasingly difficult. At that moment, an extraordinary opportunity emerged. A single agreement between the United States and France would redraw the map of North America forever. For President Thomas Jefferson, the Mississippi River was more than a trade route. The future of the young republic depended on controlling it. The American diplomats traveled to Paris hoping to purchase only the port of New Orleans. Instead, Napoleon made an unexpected offer. In 1803, the Louisiana Purchase transferred more than 2 million square kilometers of land to the United States for about $15 million, nearly doubling the nation's size overnight. Versailles-en-Metz was far more than a land purchase. The greatest obstacle to America's westward expansion had disappeared. Beyond the frontier, an unknown continent awaited. After the Louisiana Purchase, President Jefferson wanted to uncover the secrets of America's new frontier. He sent Meriwether Lewis and William Clark on one of history's greatest expeditions. The expedition crossed lands that had never been carefully mapped by the young nation. Endless prairies, mighty rivers, and an unknown world stretched before them. Along the journey, the explorers met many indigenous nations. Their most valuable guide was Sacagawea, whose knowledge helped lead the expedition safely across the continent. After more than 2 years of exploration, The expedition reached the Pacific Ocean. America had not only expanded, had begun to envision a future stretching across the entire continent. America was growing, but the British Empire still refused to fully accept the young republic as an equal power. Once again, tensions would erupt into war. War broke out in 1812. Fierce battles on land and at sea demonstrated America's determination to defend its independence. Farsay. Lan Min. 1814 British forces entered Washington and set fire to the White House and other government buildings. The young nation suffered one of the greatest shocks in its history. Although the war ended without a decisive victor, the United States had endured. The world now recognized America as a permanent and independent nation. Ahead lay an unstoppable era of westward expansion. After the War of 1812, America's confidence grew. The goal was no longer survival, it was to become the dominant power of the continent. In 1823, President James Monroe delivered a message that would change world politics. European powers would no longer be allowed to interfere in the Americas. The Monroe Doctrine was more than a foreign policy statement. The United States declared that it would shape the future of the Western Hemisphere. America now looked toward the western frontier. Ahead lay Florida, Texas, and a vast expansion that would reach all the way to the Pacific Ocean. A new challenge emerged along the southern frontier. Spanish Florida had become a center of border conflicts and instability. In Ibaito, the Adams-Onis Treaty transferred Florida from Spain to the United States. Once again, the young republic expanded its borders. At the same time, thousands of American settlers moved into Mexican Texas. Fertile land and new opportunities encouraged a growing wave of westward migration. As the American population in Texas continued to grow, tensions with the Mexican government intensified. Before long, these lands would become the stage for another struggle for independence. By 1836, tensions had erupted into war. Texas rebels launched a fight for independence against Mexico. Their first great test would be the Alamo. The defenders at the Alamo were vastly outnumbered. After days of siege, the fortress fell, but their resistance became one of the most enduring symbols in American history. After the Alamo, General Sam Houston rebuilt his army. At the Battle of San Jacinto, a surprise attack lasting only minutes changed the course of the war. After the victory, Texas declared itself an independent republic, but its future would soon become tied to the United States, a decision that would once again plunge North America into war. In 1845, Texas officially joined the United States. Mexico refused to recognize the annexation, and the two nations moved rapidly toward war. War broke out in 1846. American forces advanced rapidly, gaining control over much of northern Mexico within a short time. In 1847, American troops entered Mexico City. The outcome of the war was now clear, and Mexico was forced to seek peace. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848 gave the United States California, New Mexico, and vast western territories. The nation had expanded once again, but no one yet knew that unimaginable wealth would soon be discovered in these lands. In January 1848, an ordinary discovery was made at a small sawmill in California. A few flakes of gold found in a river would change America's future forever. News of the gold spread rapidly across the world. Thousands left everything behind and headed for California. Then tens of thousands, and soon hundreds of thousands followed. Versailles, 1849. California had become a massive gold camp. Fortune seekers arrived from every corner of the world in search of unimaginable wealth and The gold rush transformed more than lives, it transformed cities. San Francisco grew from a small port into one of America's fastest growing cities. But as the nation expanded, another issue grew with it: slavery. America was expanding rapidly, but every new territory raised the same question: would slavery spread into these new lands? While the North rapidly industrialized, the South relied on vast cotton plantations worked by enslaved labor. Two very different worlds were emerging within one nation. Political compromises were no longer enough. The nation was no longer divided by opinion. Alone, it was splitting into two opposing camps. At that moment, a politician from Illinois was rising onto the national stage. The election of Abraham Lincoln would trigger the greatest turning point in American history. In 1860, Abraham Lincoln was elected president. His opposition to the expansion of slavery sparked outrage across the southern states. Before Lincoln even took office, South Carolina led several southern states in declaring secession. The United States now stood divided between two rival governments. The seceding states formed the Confederate States of America and elected Jefferson Davis as their president. The chances for compromise were disappearing rapidly. On April 12, 1861, the bombardment of Fort Sumter marked the beginning of the American Civil War. The four-year conflict would forever reshape the nation and the lives of millions. The Civil War had raged for 2 years. In the summer of 1863, the Union and Confederate armies met at Gettysburg. The battle would decide the future of the United States. General Robert E. Lee launched one final assault to break the Union lines. Instead, Confederate forces suffered devastating losses as they crossed the open battlefield. After the battle, Abraham Lincoln delivered a brief but unforgettable speech at Gettysburg. It became a lasting symbol of the fight to preserve the Union. After Gettysburg, the balance of the war shifted. The Confederacy would never again invade the North. The United States was now moving toward the final chapter of the Civil War. On January 1, 1863, Abraham Lincoln signed one of history's most important documents. The war would no longer be fought only to preserve the Union, but also to secure freedom for millions. Following the proclamation, thousands of African Americans joined the Union Army. They were now fighting not only for their nation, but for their own freedom. Fighting side by side on the battlefield, these new regiments became a vital force in the struggle that would redefine the United States. The centuries-old system of slavery had begun to collapse, but the war was not yet over. The final battle that would determine America's future still lay ahead. By 1865, the Confederacy was exhausted. General Ulysses S. Grant launched the final offensives, forcing Southern armies into retreat. The Confederate capital of Richmond had fallen. After 4 years of war, the end was now inevitable. On April 9, 1865, General Robert E. Lee surrendered to General Grant,